Imagine this. It's the first of the month. You open a spreadsheet, or an app, or a notebook, and you write down the categories: groceries, gas, dining out, entertainment, subscriptions, miscellaneous. You assign a number to each one, reasonable numbers, numbers you've thought about. And you tell yourself that this month will be different, that this time you'll actually follow it. For about 10 days, you do. Then something happens. A work lunch you didn't plan for, a birthday dinner you couldn't skip, a grocery run that ran over because you were tired and hungry and just wanted to get home. And by the 15th, you're already off track. Not dramatically, not recklessly, just enough that the budget feels broken, like the month is already lost, like there's no point in being careful for the remaining 2 weeks because the damage is done. So you stop tracking. You tell yourself you'll reset in February. February looks almost identical to January. Most people live this cycle for years, and most people, when it keeps happening, reach the same conclusion. There must be something wrong with me. There isn't, but there might be something wrong with the tool.
Budgeting as a concept is one of the most universally recommended pieces of financial advice in America. Know what you earn, know what you spend. Keep the second number smaller than the first. Track it, review it, adjust it. The logic is airtight. The math is simple. And yet, for the overwhelming majority of people who try to budget seriously, people who genuinely want it to work, people who have read the guides and downloaded the apps and sat down with their numbers, it doesn't stick. Not for lack of effort, not for lack of understanding. It fails because of something more fundamental than effort. And the failure tends to follow a recognizable pattern. The first week is clean, clear, even motivating. There is something satisfying about seeing the numbers organized, about having a plan, about feeling like you're finally taking control. Then life arrives. And life, it turns out, does not organize itself into neat monthly categories. An invitation comes. A price goes up unexpectedly. Something breaks. A moment of exhaustion leads to a decision that would have been different on a better day. None of these are moral failures. They are just the ordinary texture of living. But the budget, structured the way most budgets are structured, treats each one like a failure, a deviation, a reason to feel behind. And feeling behind over and over again eventually produces the only rational response to a system that keeps making you feel inadequate: abandonment.
Here is what makes this genuinely frustrating. The people who fail at budgeting most consistently are often not the people who don't care about money. They are frequently the opposite, people who care deeply, who feel real anxiety about their financial situation, who want, more than almost anything, to feel like they have things under control. And so they try harder. They find a new app, a new method, a different category structure, a more detailed breakdown, a weekly review instead of monthly, a spreadsheet instead of an app instead of a spreadsheet. Each new system brings a brief revival of hope, a sense that this version will finally work because it's more precise, or more automated, or more aligned with how they actually spend. And for a while, it does. Then the same failure mode reappears, in a slightly different form, at a slightly different point in the month. And the conclusion, again, is that the person isn't trying hard enough, isn't disciplined enough, doesn't want it badly enough. But what if that conclusion is wrong? What if the issue isn't the person's level of effort, but the thing the system is asking effort to do? Because there is something the budget, as most people use it, asks of the human being at its center. It asks them to make dozens of correct financial micro-decisions every day across dozens of categories for 30 consecutive days, regardless of what is happening in their life, their stress level, their energy, their social obligations, their emotional state. It asks willpower to serve as the primary operating mechanism of a financial plan. And that is a very heavy thing to ask of willpower.
There is a quiet but important distinction in how financial behavior actually works. On one side, there is the approach most budgets use, awareness plus intention plus restraint, applied in real time every day across every decision. On the other side, there is something different, structure that makes certain outcomes more likely without requiring active decision-making in every moment. These two things look similar from a distance. Both can produce financial discipline. Both can result in less money leaving than coming in. But they place the burden of discipline in completely different places. The first approach, the one traditional budgeting relies on, places the burden on the person, on their attention, their memory, their resolve, and their ability to make the right call even when they're tired, distracted, emotionally drained, or socially pressured. The second approach places the burden on the structure, on the design of the system itself, on defaults, automation, and friction, the quiet forces that shape decisions before the moment of decision even arrives. Most financial research on human behavior points in a consistent direction. People do not make financial decisions primarily through careful, rational calculation. They make them through habit, emotion, social context, energy levels, and the path of least resistance available to them in that moment. A budget built on willpower asks a person to override all of those forces every time by sheer intention. That is not a plan designed for human beings as they actually are. It is a plan designed for a version of a human being that has never really existed. And when real people fail to match that version, when they make the predictable human decision in the moment instead of the optimal one, the budget framework offers a single explanation: lack of discipline. But discipline is not the thing that was missing. Design was. The most common response to budgeting failure is a familiar one. Be more specific, track more carefully, review more frequently, add more detail to the categories. Install a new app that links to your accounts and sends you alerts when you're close to a limit. In other words, add more oversight, more awareness, more active management. This advice is not meaningless. For some people, in some circumstances, increased visibility does produce better decisions. But it also increases the cognitive load of managing money. It requires more daily attention, not less. More moments of active restraint, more friction between the person and the ordinary flow of their life. And cognitive load, like willpower, is a limited resource. At some point in the month, usually after a long week or a stressful event or a social situation that made careful spending feel awkward or impossible, the load becomes too heavy to carry. And the budget collapses, not because the person gave up, because the system asked more than a sustainable system can ask. There is something worth sitting with here. The problem is not that people don't track enough. Many people who track meticulously still fail to maintain their budget consistently. The problem is that tracking, by itself, doesn't change the environment in which decisions get made. It just makes the person more aware of the decisions they're already predisposed to make. Awareness without changed structure tends to produce guilt more reliably than it produces different behavior, and guilt is not a financial strategy. Let's look at this from another angle. There's a version of this pattern that appears not just in monthly budgeting, but in the larger arc of how people manage financial decisions over time. When everything runs through real-time judgment, when every spending decision is evaluated in the moment by a person doing their best in whatever state they're in, the quality of those decisions is wildly inconsistent. Good decisions get made, bad ones too. The ratio depends on factors that have almost nothing to do with financial values: sleep, stress, social context, how the day went. And the inconsistency compounds. One month goes well because circumstances cooperated. The next falls apart because they didn't. And because the budget depends on human consistency in an environment that is fundamentally inconsistent, it works in patches and fails in others. Meanwhile, the people who tend to build genuine financial margin over time are often not the most disciplined decision makers in every moment. They are, frequently, the people whose financial lives are structured so that fewer decisions need to be made in real time. The savings move before they can be spent. The investment contribution is automatic before the paycheck is touched. The expensive option is made harder to access. The default is the frugal one, not the expensive one. They have not eliminated willpower from their financial lives. They have just stopped asking willpower to do all the work every day against a full slate of temptations and distractions and ordinary human fatigue. The structure does most of the carrying. The willpower handles the edges. That is a completely different relationship between a person and their financial life. And it doesn't require exceptional discipline. It requires a different kind of thinking about where discipline needs to be applied and where design can do it better.
Here is the shift that matters. Most people, when they think about budgeting failure, ask, "What is wrong with me?" The more accurate question is, what is wrong with the design? Because a system that consistently fails the people trying hardest to use it is not a system with a user problem. It is a system with a design problem. And design problems are not fixed by trying harder. They are fixed by designing differently. That is not permission to stop being intentional about money. Intention still matters. Financial decisions still require awareness and judgment. But awareness and judgment work best when they are reserved for the decisions that genuinely require them, and when everything else, the routine, the automatic, the structural, is handled by something that doesn't get tired, doesn't get emotional, doesn't get pressured at a dinner table into spending more than planned. A financial life designed around human behavior rather than against it looks different from a budget. It doesn't necessarily look more complicated. It looks more honest about what people actually are and what they're actually capable of sustaining over time.
When this framing becomes clear, when the failure is recognized as structural rather than personal, something tends to loosen. The shame of repeated budgeting failure starts to lift a little, not because the person stops caring, but because they stop interpreting failure as evidence of a character flaw. They start asking different questions. Not, why can't I follow this budget, but what would have to be true about my financial setup for the right outcome to happen without requiring a perfect decision in every moment? That question doesn't have a single answer. It varies enormously based on income, obligations, temperament, and circumstance. But the act of asking it honestly, without self-judgment, tends to surface something useful. Usually, it reveals one or two places where structure could quietly do the job that willpower has been exhausted trying to do. Not everywhere, just in the highest leverage spots. And those spots, once identified and redesigned, tend to hold, not because willpower is now stronger, because the design no longer depends on it.
The budget, for most Americans, is the first serious financial tool they encounter. It is presented as the foundation of financial responsibility, the starting point for anyone who wants to get their money right. And that framing isn't entirely wrong. Knowing what comes in and what goes out is genuinely important. But the budget, as it's commonly used, asks something that human beings are structurally not well equipped to deliver. Consistent, daily, high-quality financial decision-making, sustained indefinitely across every category of life, through good days and bad ones alike. That is not a reasonable ask. And recognizing that it isn't a reasonable ask is not an excuse to be careless. It is the beginning of a more honest relationship with money, one that works with the grain how people actually behave, rather than against it. If this video named something you felt but couldn't explain, that slow defeat of trying hard and getting the same result, sit with that. Not with guilt, with curiosity. Because a problem clearly named is already closer to being understood, and understanding it is always the right place to start.